All right, in this lesson, we're going to work on solving quadratic equations. Again, a quadratic equation is an equation that has an x squared. What's going to be unique about these equations is you're going to have the x squared term, but not the x term. So if you remember, we did a lesson on solving by factoring, where we had an x squared and an x, and we had to solve by using a different method, and factoring was the one we focused on. So this whole lesson, you're going to have just your x squared term, but it's that bx. You know how we have ax squared plus bx plus c? The bx term is not in these equations. Okay, so example 1, we're going to solve equations that have this form, just x squared equal to a number. What are the solutions of each equation? So I do want to throw out, vocab here. You're going to see in your worksheet, sometimes it says solve by inspection. So that's kind of a weird direction, like solve by inspection. So what that means is we can look at the equation and without undoing all the operations we see, we'll just kind of reason through it in our head. So our first example is x squared equals 49. Just to solve by inspection would go like this. We'd say, all right, so what number can I square and get 49 as my answer? And you guys probably already know, well, yeah, x could be a 7 because seven squared equals 49. All right, so the other thing we have to consider is you can square negative numbers and get a positive result. So what that means is that x could also be a negative 7 because negative 7 squared equals a positive 49. So there are two numbers that you could plug into your equation and square them and get a 49. So we're going to get two solutions on these, or most of these, like we have been with solving our quadratic equations. If you were to graph a related quadratic function to this, those would be your x-intercepts. Okay, so part B, solving by inspection, x squared equals negative 121. So one thing that we have to keep in mind, and let's just make a note of this, every time a number is squared, it produces a positive answer. So what this equation is saying is that we're squaring some number x and we're getting a negative answer out of that. And that just doesn't happen with our real number system, which is the only numbers you guys know about. So anytime that you have a number squared equal to a negative number over here, there is no value of x that would make this true in the real numbers. So what we say is that there is no real solution. If you were to graph the parabola for this equation, it just wouldn't cross the x-axis. And we've seen plenty of those parabolas, so no big deal. Sometimes you don't have a real solution. And the reason why I'm saying real is when you get to Algebra 2, you will be introduced to the imaginary number that does let us solve this equation, x squared equals negative 121. But that's a higher level math concept. In algebra, we are just gonna stick with the basics here. We know that every time a number is squared, it produces a positive answer. So we can't square an x and get this negative 121 in the real numbers. All right, so we'll run through these a little bit faster. This is kind of a chatty video so far. All right, so x squared equals 169. So what number can we square to get 169? Well, that's one of our perfect squares. If you're not super familiar with it yet, 13 squared is 169. So x could be 13. because 13 squared equals 169. X also could be a negative 13, so we have to remember to include that negative value as well. That is easy to forget, so just remember x squared equations typically have two answers, so we have to come up with both answers when we solve these equations. Another way to write that is you guys could see x equals, instead of writing a positive 13 and a negative 13, we have this symbol, and what we say is plus or minus. Really, it's a positive or a negative 13. So that's one way to combine those into just writing it once. So when you see this, just say, oh, it's a positive 13 and a negative 13. All right, so next example, x squared equals negative 16. So can we square a number and get a negative result? We cannot, so there is no real solution for this one.